The morning sun seeped through the kitchen blinds, casting narrow, striped shadows across the cool granite countertop where Kane Clifford stood, preparing his coffee. Steam spiraled lazily from his mug as he poured in a splash of cream, the soft clink of his spoon breaking the otherwise oppressive silence. As he stirred, the gleam of his wedding band caught the light, a subtle reminder of promises that, over the years, had begun to feel more burdensome than reassuring. He glanced at the clock. 7:15 a.m. 10 years of marriage had made him familiar with the rhythm of their mornings, an unspoken routine that had once felt perfectly synchronized, like the lines on his palm. Any minute now, Patricia would be up, charging around the house with her usual frantic energy, a new and persistent habit she'd developed in recent months. True to form, the sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs, followed by the creak of their bedroom door opening. But something was off, he couldn't quite place it. The harmony of their morning routine, so predictable over the years, now seemed slightly out of tune. The changes were small but constant. Longer showers, more time spent in front of the mirror, carefully selecting outfits with a level of precision he hadn't seen since their early days together. He carried his coffee over to the breakfast nook and opened his laptop to check his emails. But his focus kept drifting, not toward the detailed blueprints he needed to review for the upcoming firm presentation, but back to the unsettling shifts happening under his own roof. It wasn't long before he heard the familiar click of heels against the hardwood floor, signaling Patricia's arrival. She appeared in the doorway, flawlessly put together in a tailored navy pencil skirt and a cream blouse. Her dark hair was styled to perfection, cascading past her shoulders in waves, effort she used to reserve for their date nights, back when they still had those. "Morning," Kane said, watching her as she bypassed him, heading straight for the coffee machine, her phone already in hand. "Morning," she muttered, her focus entirely on the screen in front of her. Her fingers moved quickly, typing out a message with a small, private smile tugging at her lips, a smile he hadn't seen aimed at him in what felt like ages. "Want breakfast? I can make eggs," he offered, the words slipping out before he could stop them. A hint of longing in his voice for the mornings they used to share, the ones spent over scrambled eggs and planning the day together. "No time," she replied curtly, filling a travel mug without so much as glancing up. "Big presentation today. The Johnson account needs final tweaks before the meeting." Kane nodded, noting once again how she was deliberately avoiding his gaze. "Another late night, then?" "Probably," she said, dropping a tea bag into her mug, a recent habit she'd adopted, claiming it was better for her skin to drink green tea now. "Don't wait up for dinner. I'll grab something at the office." "I could bring you lunch," he suggested, his voice tentative, testing the waters. "There's a new Thai place near your building." For the first time that morning, she actually looked at him, but her gaze was fleeting, darting away as quickly as it had landed. "That's sweet, but I've got a working lunch with the team. Maybe another time," she said, her tone flat, almost rehearsed. Just then, her phone buzzed, cutting through the tension. The smile that flickered across her face was quick, automatic. She turned slightly, shielding the screen from his view as she typed a reply. "I should get going," she said, grabbing her purse and walking toward the hallway mirror. She paused in front of it, taking a moment to touch up her lipstick, Ruby Woo, the shade he'd given her last Christmas, and fluffed her hair with a precision he knew she'd mastered over the years. "Have a good day." The sound of the front door clicking shut echoed through the empty house. He sat there for a while, lost in the silence, trying to figure out when things had started to unravel. It hadn't happened all at once. There was no single defining moment, but rather a gradual erosion, like slow waves eating away at the shoreline. Looking back, though, the signs had been unmistakable. Clothes with tags mysteriously missing, phone calls she always took out of earshot. All these pieces formed a puzzle he couldn't ignore any longer. At work, Kane found it hard to concentrate. The blueprints for the Harrison project blurred in front of him as his mind kept returning to the unsettling events of the morning. "Earth to Kane," Albert, his colleague and closest friend, said, waving his hand in front of his face. You've been staring at that section for like 20 minutes. What's going on? Kane blinked, snapping back to the present and forcing a tight smile. Just thinking about the support beam placement, he said, lying smoothly. Albert raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. He leaned against the desk, lowering his voice. Sure it's not something else? You've been kinda off lately. It's nothing, Kane replied, straightening a few papers on his desk. A nervous habit when his mind wouldn't settle. Just some stuff at home I need to sort through. Albert held his hands up defensively. All right, man. Not my business. Just saying, I'm here if you want to talk. Kane nodded, appreciating the sentiment but unwilling to admit the suspicions gnawing at him. Voicing them would make them real, and he wasn't ready for that yet. Not today. The hours dragged on, each one tempting him to leave the office and drive by Patricia's office to check if her working lunch story held up. Instead, he buried himself in the Harrison project, making more progress in one afternoon than he had all week. By the time he left, the sun was already setting. He decided to cook dinner, a small attempt at holding onto some semblance of normalcy in a life that felt increasingly foreign. Stopping at the grocery store on his way home, he picked up the ingredients for her favorite chicken marsala. Maybe a familiar meal would help bridge the widening gap between them. But when he returned home, the house felt emptier than usual. He moved through the motions of cooking, the familiar routine offering a brief distraction from the knot in his stomach. The chicken had just come out of the oven when he heard her key in the lock. Earlier than expected. His pulse quickened as he heard the click of her heels on the hardwood, followed by the sound of her pausing, as she always did by the hallway mirror. He couldn't help but notice that she was probably checking her reflection again. Something smells amazing, Patricia said as she entered the kitchen. Her cheeks faintly flushed, her hair just tousled enough to make Kane wonder if it was the wind, or if something else was going on. I thought we could have dinner together for a change, Kane said casually, his voice light as he plated the food. How'd the presentation go? It went great, she replied, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. It was a nervous gesture, one Kane knew all too well. The client loved our initial concepts. We're moving forward with the full proposal. Kane nodded, setting their plates down on the dining table. He'd opened a bottle of red wine earlier, letting it breathe, and poured a glass for her. Patricia slid into her seat, immediately reaching for her phone. Work can wait, he said, trying to keep his tone light. When's the last time we actually sat down to dinner together? A flicker of guilt crossed her face as she put the phone down. You're right, she said, managing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. This looks wonderful, honey. The meal began, but the air between them was heavy, mechanical. The clinking of cutlery and the soft scrape of plates were the only sounds filling the space. Kane watched her closely, noticing how her eyes kept darting toward the phone, how her leg bounced nervously under the table. Another one of her little habits he used to find endearing. How's the Johnson account really going? He asked, breaking the silence. Must be keeping you pretty busy with all these late nights. Patricia looked up, her expression distracted. Yes, she said, her words coming out too quickly, almost too rehearsed. The client has really specific demands. Oliver. She hesitated, just briefly, but long enough for Kane to notice. The team's been working extra hours to meet their expectations. As if on cue, her phone lit up, resting on the table between them. She shifted in her chair, and Kane caught a glimpse of the message before she angled the phone away. The words burned into his mind. I can't wait to do it again with you in the shower. Time froze. He couldn't stop repeating the words in his head, each repetition like a fresh stab to the chest. Everything okay? He asked. Just work stuff, she muttered, shoving her phone into her pocket as though hiding it would somehow erase what he'd just seen. You know how it is, deadlines, client demands. Kane forced himself to take another bite of the chicken. His mind was spinning, replaying every moment from the past few months with a new, damning clarity. The late nights, the secretive phone, the growing emotional distance. It all made sense now, a puzzle piecing itself together in a way he couldn't ignore. "I should look over some files for tomorrow," Patricia said suddenly, standing so abruptly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her plate, nearly untouched, was left behind. "Thanks for dinner. It was delicious." Kane watched her walk toward the home office, his appetite completely gone. The urge to confront her, to demand answers, surged inside him, but something colder, more calculated, held him back. He needed to know more, to have everything before he acted. That night, lying next to her in bed, Kane stared at the ceiling fan as it spun in slow, lazy circles above them. Patricia lay with her back to him, her breathing shallow, too controlled to be genuine sleep. The distance between them felt like an uncrossable gulf. He thought back to their wedding day, to the joy in her eyes as she swore to love him forever. Now, those memories seemed distant, tainted by the reality of her betrayal. The next morning, Kane set his plan in motion. He left for work early but parked near Patricia's office instead. From his car, he watched her arrive, noting the way she checked her reflection in the glass door before entering. 20 minutes later, a man he didn't recognize held the door open for her, following too closely behind. Their interaction was far too familiar, too comfortable. Over the next few days, Kane began to piece together the truth. He saw how Patricia never left her phone unattended, even taking it with her into the bathroom. But her confidence began to slip, leaving small cracks in her defenses. During one of those moments, while she was in the shower, Kane seized the opportunity. His hands trembled slightly as he unlocked her phone, thankful that she hadn't changed the password. The evidence was right there in front of him. Flirty, suggestive exchanges with Oliver Eddington, and references to meetings that didn't show up on her work calendar. Kane's stomach turned as he quickly searched for Oliver on LinkedIn. The profile that appeared confirmed everything. A man in his early 30s, dark hair perfectly styled, and a headshot that looked like it belonged in a magazine. He was a senior account manager at Patricia's firm, with glowing recommendations praising his charm and rapport with clients. Each new detail twisted the knife deeper into Kane's gut. At dinner that evening, Kane pretended everything was fine, asking about her day as she went on about deadlines and demanding clients. He noticed how she subtly checked her phone beneath the table, a faint smile playing on her lips as she read messages he couldn't see. The final confirmation came when he stopped for coffee near Patricia's office, pretending he was in the area for a client meeting. As he sat at a nearby table, he overheard two women gossiping loud enough for him to catch every word. "Did you see them at the holiday party?" one whispered. Oliver was practically glued to Patricia. "He's always been a player, right?" the other replied, her voice dripping with knowing sarcasm. "Remember IVI from accounting? Same story, different year. Though, I gotta say, he usually sticks to single women." Kane's grip tightened around his coffee cup, the cardboard bending under the pressure. He forced himself to stay calm as the women continued. "Well, you know what they say about the quiet ones," the first woman added. "She always seemed so straight-laced, but I guess Oliver has a way of bringing out the wild side." "Did you see them at Murphy's last week?" one of the women asked in a low voice. "I was there with Liam having tea, and they were in the back booth. Definitely not talking about the Johnson account, if you catch my drift." Their laughter followed, loud and grating, slicing through Kane's already raw nerves. He stood abruptly, leaving his half-finished coffee on the table as he walked toward the door. That evening, as he watched Patricia prepare for yet another late meeting, something inside Kane shifted. As he observed her from the kitchen doorway, his emotions had cooled. No longer a chaotic mix of hurt and disbelief, but something colder, sharper. He noticed every detail. The way she applied fresh lipstick in the hallway mirror, the way she smoothed her skirt, adjusting it with the meticulousness of someone trying to impress, and how she checked her reflection again, making sure she looked perfect. "Don't wait up," she called over her shoulder, her voice light, practiced. "Lots to review for the Johnson account." "Of course," Kane replied, his tone neutral. "Good luck with the review." The door clicked softly behind her, and Kane walked to the window, watching her car pull out of the driveway. He waited until the taillights disappeared around the corner before grabbing his keys. Tonight, he decided he was going to find out exactly what kind of review she was really having. Following her was easier than he'd thought it would be. She drove to a quiet Italian restaurant on the other side of town, far enough from both their home and her office to avoid anyone they knew. Through the softly lit window, Kane saw her greet Oliver with a kiss that left no room for doubt. They settled into a booth, leaning close, sharing a bottle of wine, and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Kane sat in his car. He watched them. Every detail burned into his mind. Oliver's smile, the way his hand rested possessively on Patricia's, how at ease they were with each other. This wasn't just a fling. This was an affair that ran deep. The next week was a blur of observation and careful documentation. Kane tracked their movements, where they met, what lies Patricia told to cover her absences. He watched her transform into someone he barely recognized, laughing and flirting with a freedom she hadn't shown him in years. Each night, as she lay beside him in their bed, Kane refined his plan. The raw anger he had initially felt had hardened into something far more deliberate, more calculated. He didn't want to confront her in the heat of the moment, to make it something they could dismiss with a few tearful words. No, he wanted them both to understand the depth of their betrayal and what it had cost him. One evening, as Patricia showered, Kane's eyes fell on her phone, carelessly left on the kitchen counter. Her confidence had made her careless. When the screen lit up with a notification, he seized the opportunity. The message was from Oliver, setting up their next meeting. Kane picked up the phone, his jaw clenched. He'd made up his mind. Tonight wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. He needed more leverage, more control. Calmly, he memorized Oliver's number and replaced the phone exactly where it had been. As the shower continued upstairs, Kane stood by the window, staring out at the quiet street. That night, lying in bed beside Patricia, Kane stared at the ceiling. Her breathing was even, but he knew she wasn't asleep. The space between them felt vast, a chasm that could never be crossed again. He thought about the life they'd built, the trust they'd shared, and the dreams they had once made together. All of it had been shattered. His resolve was set. He would make them pay, not with explosive rage but with careful precision. He would make them both feel the weight of their betrayal. The next day, Kane began setting his trap. His home office became a war room, cluttered with evidence. Photographs of Patricia and Oliver at restaurants and hotels, screenshots of messages he'd captured, notes with times and dates. Spread across his desk, they painted an undeniable picture of her betrayal. Oliver's phone number, scrawled on a post-it note, seemed to mock him with its existence. That afternoon, Patricia's phone buzzed again, lying unattended on the kitchen counter. Kane picked it up, his face impassive as he opened the messages. He typed carefully, mimicking her tone. "I need to see you tonight. Kane's working late on the Harrison project. Come to the house. Don't want to wait for our usual spot." The reply came quickly. "Dangerous. Your place? What's gotten into you?" Kane forced himself to respond with controlled ease. "Miss you too much. Door will be unlocked. Let yourself in. Want you in my house for once." Oliver's response came immediately, each word feeling like a fresh wound. "Oh babe, I like this side of you. See you at 8. Can't wait to feel your hands on me." Kane deleted the conversation and replaced the phone. Checking the time, 2 p.m. He noted he had 6 hours until Oliver would walk straight into his trap. In his office, Kane picked up his phone and dialed Albert. "I need a favor," he said, his voice cool. "What's up?" Albert asked, the sound of blueprints rustling in the background. "If anyone asks, I'm working late on the Harrison project tonight." There was a brief pause. "Why, man? You've been off lately." "I just need an alibi," Kane said, his tone firm. "Can you handle it?" Albert hesitated but then agreed. "Yeah, of course. But seriously, if you need to talk." "I don't," Kane interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Just cover for me." After ending the call, Kane leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the scattered evidence on his desk. The pieces were falling into place. Tonight, Patricia and Oliver would realize their secret wasn't as safe as they thought. They'd discover exactly what betrayal cost. Kane spent the next few hours preparing meticulously. He rearranged the furniture just slightly, ensuring clear pathways through the room. He double-checked the security cameras he'd installed the previous week. They captured every angle perfectly. This wasn't just about confrontation, it was about having evidence if it came to that. He wasn't leaving anything to chance. "I might go to the gym later," Patricia said, avoiding his eyes as she poured herself a glass of water. "The Harrison project needs my attention," he replied evenly, his tone betraying nothing. "I'll probably be at the office late. Don't wait up." Relief flickered across her face, poorly concealed. "Okay, good luck with the project," she said, her voice just a little too light. Underneath the table, her fingers moved swiftly across her phone screen. Kane could almost see the text she was sending. "Coast is clear. Still on for tonight." His hands tensed for a moment before he forced them to relax. "There's leftover chicken in the fridge if you want it," he added. "Thanks, honey," she replied with a fleeting smile. At 7, Kane made a show of gathering his work materials, stuffing blank papers into his briefcase. He kissed her cheek lightly. "Don't work too hard at the gym," he said. "I won't," she replied quickly, already reaching for her phone as he walked out the door. Kane didn't head to the office. Instead, he parked his car a block away. At 7:45, he saw Patricia's car pull out of the driveway. She wasn't going to the gym. He'd followed her enough times to know her usual route. Tonight, like so many others, she was heading to the wine bar 3 blocks from Oliver's apartment, their usual rendezvous point before moving to his place. By 7:55, Kane was back inside his house, waiting in the darkened living room. The security cameras blinked steadily, their small red lights a silent witness to the night's events. He had envisioned this confrontation 1,000 times. Violence had crossed his mind, a visceral, primal urge to make Oliver feel the same pain. But it was too easy, too fleeting. No, this had to be about consequences, about understanding. At precisely 8 o'clock, the front door opened with a quiet click. Confident footsteps echoed down the hallway, unhurried and self-assured. Kane recognized the sound of expensive leather soles on hardwood, Italian, he guessed, based on his observations of Oliver's style. The footsteps paused by the staircase briefly before continuing toward the living room. Kane reached over and flicked on the lamp. The sudden light made Oliver freeze in the doorway, one hand raised as if adjusting his tie. He was younger in person, early 30s, with the polished, gym-sculpted appearance of someone who prioritized looking good as part of his persona. The confidence in his expression evaporated as his eyes locked on Kane, reality crashing into whatever fantasy he'd been entertaining. "You must be Oliver," Kane said, his voice dangerously calm. "Come in. We should talk about your relationship with my wife." "There's been a misunderstanding," Oliver stammered, stepping back slightly toward the hallway. His eyes darted between Kane and the front door, calculating the distance. Kane stood slowly, his 6'2" frame towering over Oliver's more compact build. "No misunderstanding," he said coldly. "Sit down. Look, man. Sit down." Each word dripped with barely contained violence, leaving no room for argument. Oliver sank into the armchair reluctantly, his bravado fading. "Listen, I don't want any trouble," he began, his tone shifting to appeasement. "This is clearly a sensitive situation." "Sensitive?" Kane laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Trouble was walking into my home thinking you'd spend time with my wife in my house." "What's happening now, Oliver?" "She said you two were having problems," Oliver muttered, his eyes flickering toward the door again. "Said you were distant, that the marriage was basically over. And you believed her?" Kane stepped closer, looming over him. "Or did you just not care? How many married women have you pursued, Oliver? The office gossip says I'm not the first husband you've disrespected." Oliver's face paled. "Who told you that? IVI from accounting, maybe? Or one of the others?" Kane said, his smile sharp and cutting. "Word gets around, doesn't it? the charming account manager who preys on vulnerable women. Tell me, do you have a system? Or do you just toss out lines until someone bites? This is crazy, Oliver said, standing abruptly, his fear overtaking his practiced charm. I'm leaving. Kane's hand shot out, gripping Oliver's shoulder with bruising force. Not yet. He shoved Oliver back into the chair with ease. First, you're going to listen to exactly what kind of man you are. Get your hands off me, Oliver growled, struggling, but Kane's grip only tightened. I said listen. Kane shoved him harder, making the armchair creak under the force. You walked into my house, my life, thinking there'd be no consequences. It stops now. Oliver tried to stand again, but Kane's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling over the coffee table. I've done my research, Kane said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. 3 affairs with married women in the past 2 years. HR complaints that conveniently disappeared. You're not just a homewrecker, Oliver. You're a predator. You don't know anything? Oliver spat, struggling to his feet. I know everything. Kane pulled out his phone, holding it up to show screenshots of emails, texts, and photos. Every meeting, every hotel, every lie. One email to your HR department about you spending time with a married coworker, and your career is over. How many companies want to deal with someone like you? What do you want? Oliver's voice trembled. Kane crouched to meet him eye to eye. I want you to understand your place in this. You're not her savior. You're not her escape. You're just a convenient reproductive organ who doesn't care about the destruction you leave behind. Oliver's breathing quickened as Kane leaned closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to disappear from her life. No goodbyes. No explanations, Kane said, his voice cold and measured. You'll block her number, avoid her at work, and if she tries to contact you, remember this moment. You're insane, Oliver spat. Kane's fist connected with his jaw again, sending Oliver sprawling back onto the floor. I'm perfectly sane. I'm just done playing nice. He hauled Oliver up by the collar, the expensive fabric tearing slightly under his grip. Do we understand each other? Oliver nodded frantically. Yeah, I understand. It's over. I'll stay away. Good. Kane released him, watching as Oliver stumbled toward the door. And Oliver? If I ever see you near my wife again, this conversation won't be so civilized. Oliver fled, slamming the door behind him. Through the window, Kane watched him sprint to his car, fumbling with his keys before peeling out onto the street. The house fell silent again. Phase 1 was complete. Now came the harder conversation. At 9:15, headlights swept across the windows. Kane sat in his armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, waiting. The front door opened, and Patricia stepped inside, stopping short when she saw him. Kane, her voice pitched high with surprise. I thought you were at the Harrison Project. Sit down, Patricia, he said, his voice quiet but steely. The authority in his tone left no room for argument. She obeyed, lowering herself into the chair with hesitant movements. We need to talk about Oliver. The color drained from her face. What are you? Don't, Kane interrupted, his hand tightening around his glass. Don't insult me by lying. Not anymore. Kane, please. I can explain everything. Patricia started, her voice trembling. Explain what? Kane snapped, rising from his chair with such force it scraped against the floor. The late nights? The gym sessions that magically left your hair perfectly styled? Or maybe the texts about shower while we sat together at dinner? He pulled out his phone, the screen glowing with damning evidence, and held it up for her to see. Tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't, I never meant to get caught. Kane finished for her, his tone razor sharp. That's what you're sorry for, isn't it? Not the betrayal, not the lies. Just the fact that your perfect little affair fell apart. No, it's not like that. Patricia stood abruptly, reaching for him, but he took a deliberate step back. I love you, Kane. It was a mistake, she sobbed, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Please, we can fix this. There's nothing left to fix, Kane said coldly, towering over her. Your lover just left here with a new appreciation for boundaries. He won't be waiting for you anymore. Pack your things. I want you out of this house tonight. Kane, please. Where am I supposed to go? She cried, desperation cracking her voice. That's not my problem, he said. You. Patricia's expression darkened, her tears giving way to anger. I'll go to the police. Kane laughed, the sound harsh and devoid of humor. Go ahead. Tell them how your married lover walked into my house to hook up with my wife. I'm sure your workplace will love that story. And just so you know, everything is recorded, Patricia. Everything. Her shoulders slumped, and she collapsed onto the couch, sobs shaking her body. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. No, you're not, Kane said quietly, his voice cutting through the room. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. Sorry that your cushy little life is falling apart. But genuine remorse? That's nowhere in you. He climbed the stairs, his back to her. Pack your bags. When I come back down, I want you gone. In their bedroom, Kane sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the sounds of her frantic movements below. Drawers opened and slammed shut, hangers scraped across rods, and her muffled sobs punctuated the quiet. His phone buzzed, but he ignored it. Albert had sent another message, asking if everything was okay. But that wasn't his focus right now. An hour later, the soft click of the front door signaled her departure. Kane descended the stairs to find. On the coffee table lay her key and a note. He picked up the key and pocketed it, deliberately ignoring the letter. Whatever justification or apology she'd scribbled meant nothing now. His phone buzzed again. Please don't do this. We can talk. I'll do anything. Another followed. I love you, Kane. And another. Where am I supposed to go? My life is here. Kane sighed, blocking her number and deleting the messages without hesitation. He poured himself another glass of whiskey, sitting in the stillness of the house. It wasn't happiness that he felt. He wasn't sure he'd feel that again anytime soon, but there was a sense of satisfaction. He had taken control of a situation that had once left him feeling powerless. The house, now empty of her presence, felt cleaner, like a wound freshly bandaged. Painful, yes, but necessary. His phone buzzed once more, this time from an unknown number. You've made your point. I'm done with all of this. She's your problem now. Oliver. Likely from another phone. Kane smirked grimly and blocked the number. No, he thought. She's her own problem now. The next morning was cold and overcast, matching Kane's mood. He sat at the kitchen counter, staring at a business card. James Walker, divorce attorney. It had been tucked in his wallet for weeks, waiting for the inevitable. He picked up the card, his mind resolute. At 9:47 a.m., the doorbell rang. Kane glanced at the security camera feed on his phone. Patricia was pacing on the porch, looking disheveled and distraught. Her makeup was streaked from crying, her clothes wrinkled from the night before, and her once meticulously styled hair was now a tangled mess. Kane! Her voice cracked as it came through the intercom. Please, I know you're in there. We need to talk about this like adults. Kane didn't move, watching her through the screen as she pressed her forehead against the door. I have nowhere else to go, she continued, her voice breaking. Oliver won't answer my calls. My credit cards aren't working. I tried to get a hotel room, but Kane cut her off, his voice cool and controlled as he spoke through the intercom. Our joint accounts are frozen. Lawyer's recommendation. You can't do this to me, she shouted, her desperation turning to anger. I helped build this life too. Everything we have. Everything we had, Kane corrected sharply, still not opening the door. At least let me in so we can talk properly, she begged, banging her fist on the door. This is still my house too. Kane opened the door abruptly, causing Patricia to stumble back. Actually, it's not your house anymore, he said flatly. My name is on the deed. I bought it before we were married. But I'm guessing you didn't read the prenup that carefully. Did you? Up close, she looked even worse than he'd imagined. mascara smeared under red-rimmed eyes. Her expensive suit rumpled as though she'd spent the night sleeping in her car. She clutched her designer purse like a lifeline, but it wouldn't help her now. "Can I just come in?" Patricia's voice softened, slipping back into the coaxing tone she used when she wanted something. "Please, just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." No, Kane's stance didn't waver. He stood firm, blocking the doorway with his body. "I'll give you 5 minutes right here. Consider it more generous than you deserve." Patricia hesitated, looking at him with a mix of desperation and hurt. "I made a horrible mistake," she began, wringing her hands. "Oliver didn't mean anything. It was stupid, selfish, but 10 years of marriage." 10 years of what? Kane cut her off, his voice calm but chilling. 10 years of me building a life while you were building a relationship with your coworker? "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, her tone defensive. "Things between us had gotten distant. Oliver was just... he made me feel..." "Don't," Kane interrupted with a single word, his voice a quiet blade cutting through her excuses. "I don't care why you did it. I don't care how he made you feel. I care that you did it, and that you looked me in the eye every day and lied. We can fix this," she pleaded. "People get past affairs all the time with counseling, with time." "Want to know what I find interesting?" Kane asked, his voice suddenly cold and piercing. "You're more upset about losing your comfortable life than losing me." "That's not true," she protested, tears spilling freely from her eyes. "I love you, Kane." "No," he said, his tone steady. "You loved the life I provided, the house, the lifestyle, the stability. Tell me something, Patricia. How long would it have gone on if I hadn't caught you?" She flinched, guilt flashing across her face for a moment before she wiped her eyes. 6 months, Kane answered for her, his voice sharp as glass. "I have every receipt, every hotel bill, every charge. Did you think I wouldn't notice the joint account draining for your little rendezvous? You were watching me?" Patricia's cheeks flushed with anger now. "How dare you spy on me? How dare I?" Kane's laugh was a short, bitter bark. "You're standing here, begging to come back into my house after I caught you with your lover in my bedroom, and you're upset about invasion of privacy?" Patricia opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, her words faltering in the face of his cold fury. "People make mistakes," she said, taking a tentative step closer to him, her voice softening to one of pleading. "Haven't you ever made a mistake?" "A mistake?" Kane's voice was low as he shook his head. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. Spending months with your coworker? That's not a mistake, Patricia. That's a choice. A series of choices you made every single time you met him." "What about counseling?" She tried again, her tone shifting to desperation. "We could work through this. Learn to trust again. Build something stronger." "There is no we anymore, Patricia," Kane replied, pulling an envelope from his back pocket. He held it out, the weight of it heavier than she could have ever imagined. "These are divorce papers. My lawyer will contact yours." Patricia's breath hitched, and her voice broke. "I don't have a lawyer," she said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I don't have anything. You've frozen all our accounts." "Joint accounts," Kane corrected her, his gaze unwavering. "Your personal account is still active." "Oh wait, that's right. You spent most of it on hotels and lingerie for Oliver, didn't you?" Her hand shot up to slap him, but Kane caught her wrist in a firm grip, effortlessly stopping her. His hold wasn't painful, but it was unyielding. "Don't," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. He held her wrist until she finally lowered it. "You lost the right to touch me the moment you let him touch you." Patricia's shoulders sagged in defeat, her voice barely a whisper now. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, her face crumpling. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," Kane replied, releasing her wrist and stepping aside, motioning toward the door. "You're a college-educated professional, Patricia. Figure it out." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "My parents will never forgive me. They already know." Kane's smile was sharp, cutting through the tension in the air. I called them last night, told them everything. Your mother cried. Your father asked if the prenup was still valid. He seemed relieved when I said yes. Patricia's face drained of color. You didn't. Kane's smirk deepened. Oh, I did. It's over, Patricia. There's no coming back from this. I did, Kane confirmed, his voice cold and steady. Just like I sent emails to HR documenting Oliver's pattern of pursuing married coworkers. Did you not know about his fiancée in Boston? Patricia staggered back, her face paling as the words hit her. He's engaged? She whispered, barely able to believe it. 3 years, Kane replied, his tone almost clinical. Long-distance relationship. She was very interested in the photos I sent her, especially the ones from your weekend getaway to the Riviera Hotel. You know, the one you told me was a marketing conference? Patricia's face twisted in fury, but it broke into an incoherent, anguished cry. You've ruined everything. No, Patricia, Kane said, his expression unflinching. He held the envelope out to her again, his gaze unyielding. You did that. Take the papers. Read them. Sign them. The faster you do, the faster this ends. She snatched the envelope from his hand with a sharp motion. I could fight this. I could get my own lawyer. With what money? Kane leaned back against the doorframe, his posture almost relaxed. His eyes, however, were ice. The prenup is very clear about infidelity. You get what you brought in minus any joint assets acquired during the marriage. Considering your shopping habits, that's not much. Patricia's anger flared. I helped you build your career, she spat, her voice rising. All those client dinners, those networking events, I was there. And while I was helping build our future, you were tearing apart our present. Kane checked his watch, clearly uninterested in her tantrum. Your 5 minutes are up, he said, his voice flat. Go find a lawyer, Patricia. The next time we talk, it'll be through them. Wait, she cried, grabbing the edge of the door as he began to close it. What about my things? My clothes? They're in garbage bags in the garage, Kane replied coolly, along with all the lingerie receipts I found. Funny how your taste in underwear improved when you had someone else to show it to. Patricia's breath hitched, her hand flying to her mouth in disbelief. You're being cruel, she whispered, her voice trembling. No, he replied, his expression hardening. I'm being honest. Something you might want to try. He pried her hand off the door with deliberate care. The garage will be open until noon. After that, anything left goes to Goodwill. I have nothing, she choked out, her tears streaming freely now. You have exactly what you chose, Kane said, closing the door with a sharp, final click, locking it with a decisive turn of the knob. Through the security feed, Kane watched her linger on the porch for several minutes, staring down at the divorce papers in her hands, her shoulders trembling with sobs. Finally, she walked to her car, a luxury vehicle that Kane had already arranged to be repossessed the next day. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings and paperwork. Patricia tried to contact him twice more, even showing up at his office one day, causing a scene that would be the talk of the office for weeks. You can't just throw me away, she had shouted, her voice shrill. 10 years. Don't I deserve a second chance? Kane ignored the whispers from his coworkers. Let them talk. He had nothing to be ashamed of. At their legal meetings, Patricia's lawyer, an impeccably dressed woman who seemed more at ease in a boardroom than a courtroom, tried to fight the prenup. My client contributed significantly to this marriage, she argued, gesturing toward Kane with a sweeping motion. The house value has doubled. The investment portfolio. Your client violated the fidelity clause, Kane's lawyer interrupted, sliding a stack of receipts, photos, and messages across the table. Section 3, paragraph 2, is explicit about the consequences. Patricia's lawyer flinched, trying to push back. These photos were obtained without her consent, she argued, her voice tightening. In public places, Kane's lawyer shot back without missing a beat. There's no expectation of privacy in a hotel lobby or a restaurant. The credit card statements? Completely admissible. The negotiations lasted a mere 20 minutes. Patricia left the meeting with only her personal belongings, her car loan transferred to her name, and a settlement so modest it wouldn't cover 3 months' rent in a decent apartment. A month later, word spread through Kane's office that Oliver had left the company. He'd returned to Boston, trying and failing to salvage his engagement. The last anyone had heard, he'd taken a lower-paying job at a smaller firm, his career trajectory permanently derailed. Patricia, too, had switched jobs, accepting a lesser position at a company across town. She tried reaching out through mutual friends, sending messages about regret and personal growth, but Kane ignored each one. He blocked every new number, deleted every message without reading it. "She seems really sorry," his sister Mia said one morning over coffee. "Maybe," Kane began, but then he cut her off with a finality that brooked no argument. "No." 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Patricia made one last attempt. Kane found her sitting on his porch steps one evening. She looked thinner, older, her beauty drained by the weight of her choices. She was a shadow of the woman she once was. "Just hear me out," she pleaded as he approached. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Kane shook his head. "I already gave you 5. I've lost everything," she said, her voice quiet, almost broken. "My job, my friends, my home. Oliver, he never cared about me. He just moved on to the next willing woman." "You didn't lose anything," Kane replied, turning to face her fully. "You threw it away. There's a difference. Can we please talk?" she begged, standing up and wiping at her eyes. "All these years together, do they mean nothing?" Kane unlocked his door and looked back at her. "The woman I married never existed. She was just a role you played until something more exciting came along." "That's not true." She grabbed his arm, desperation in her eyes. "I loved you. You have a funny way of showing it," he said, shaking off her grip. He stepped toward the door. "Go home, Patricia. Whatever's left of it. I have an apartment share with 2 roommates," she said bitterly, her voice a mixture of frustration and defeat. "My portion of the rent is more than I can afford on my salary." "Is that what you wanted to hear?" Kane's voice grew colder. "I don't want to hear anything from you. That's the point you keep missing." "You've punished me enough," she cried, her voice rising in frustration. "I get it, okay? I screwed up. I lost everything. Isn't that enough?" Kane paused in the doorway, his tone calm, yet unwavering. "It's not about punishment, Patricia. It's about consequences. You made choices, adult choices. Now you're living with adult consequences." "So that's it?" she asked, her voice breaking. 10 years mean nothing?" "They meant everything," Kane said, meeting her gaze with a look that could have frozen the air between them. "That's why there's no coming back from this. Goodbye, Patricia." He stepped inside, closing the door with a firm, final motion. Through the window, he watched her shoulders shake with sobs before she turned and walked away, disappearing into the fading light of evening. Inside, Kane poured himself a whiskey and sank into his favorite chair. The house was still empty, but it was no longer a monument to betrayal. It was quiet, almost peaceful. His phone buzzed with a text from Albert. "Drinks tonight? You've been hibernating too long." Kane stared at the message for a moment before replying. "Give me 30 minutes." He glanced around the living room. The furniture had been rearranged. The security cameras were gone, their memory cards safely stored with his lawyer. The space was no longer haunted by that night's confrontation. Before leaving, he checked his phone one last time. A new message had arrived from an unknown number, Patricia's latest attempt to reach him. Without opening it, he deleted the message and blocked the number. It no longer felt like anger. It felt like closing a book. The story was over. It was time to start a new one. Grabbing his keys, Kane stepped out to meet Albert. Behind him, the house stood quiet and empty, its rooms slowly transforming into something new, a foundation for whatever came next. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for certain. No one would ever make him question his worth again.